Hi, I'm Denison, creator of Marine Diesel Basics. Welcome to this video in which I'll share some of the backstory of how I became a marine mechanic because of all the problems on my second boat. That boat was a Tahitiana, 36 feet steel hull. A Tahitiana you could think of as a granddaughter of a Colin Archer, the famous double-ender. The Kuan Yin was a wonderful seaboat, really. In a gale, when the wind got up, you felt very secure aboard her. She was rigged as a ketch and easy for a solo sailor to sail. However, I had lots of problems with the engine. The engine itself was an Isuzu 3AB1 from the 1970s, and although the engine itself was very reliable, there were some serious problems due to poor installation of the engine originally and lack of maintenance. The first problem came when I was bringing the boat down from Georgian Bay to Toronto in Ontario, Canada, when the engine died and I discovered that the fuel was pitch black. It was just absolutely full of what's called asphaltenes. So that was the first issue. Then I was going from Toronto down the St. Lawrence Seaway and the St. Lawrence River into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. I'd had quite a go through the huge ship locks, and then had to go full power against the current of the St. Lawrence River to get to Montreal. And a couple of days later, when I started out, it turned out that 3 engine mounts had broken and the engine had fallen on its side, which is not a good look, particularly when you're in a shipping lane. I managed to sail down to a marina just above Quebec City, and the next day a couple of mechanics came down and they got that sorted. Then we discovered that the cutlass bearing was worn. There was no haul out facility, so I took the boat round into a bay next door to the marina. The bay had a drying height of 2 meters and Kuan Yin drew 1.6. So going in at high tide and then putting legs out and then waiting for the low tide, they were able to, 2 mechanics were able to come down the next day and install a new cutlass bearing. So that was fine, and then I continued down the St. Lawrence into the Gulf of St. Lawrence to Labrador. And Labrador is a remote area. It's sparsely populated with isolated communities, and one day I was going along, suddenly the boat lost speed. I looked over the side, the propeller was still there but barely moving. Okay. Out of gear, neutral, astern, neutral, forward, everything solved, off we go again. A few hours later, the same thing happened, same solution. Everything was fine. I was going through a narrow channel into the open Atlantic, and if the propulsion had failed at that stage, probably the boat would have been on the rocks. However, it didn't, but it did happen a couple of more times. So that winter, I researched a lot about what the problem could be, what the solution could be. When I went back to the boat in the spring, tried all these solutions. I was all set to leave St. Anthony in northern Newfoundland to go back to Labrador when the same problem happened again. And I decided, okay, I am not leaving until I've solved this problem. Well, it turned out that they had stopped making parts for this model of transmission in 1991. So there was no way that I was going to find parts, even if I could identify what the problem was. So I ended up buying a new transmission. Getting that, and I had to drill out the bell housing to install the new transmission, was quite a challenge for me. I was really intimidated the whole way through. When I started, I didn't even know what a bell housing was. However, got it installed, set off again the next year to go to Labrador. And I should mention, the reason I was in Labrador was to retrace a voyage made in 1811 by 2 Inuit sailors and 2 Moravian German missionaries. And they wrote a book about their voyage, and I thought it'd be kind of fun to retrace the voyage and, you know, bring their adventure to life. However, it didn't quite work out that way, because then the next problem occurred. Well, I lost all the engine oil one day. That was a fairly minor thing, but you know, all these things, when you're on a coastline of 1,000 miles and there's 4 communities, and it happens when you're far from anywhere, it can be quite challenging. Anyway, pressed on. Then the next problem happened. I got way up in the north of Labrador and the engine wouldn't start. And I tried various tricks. Okay, I put the spare starter on, the engine started. Clearly the problem was the old starter. We went along for another week, then it wouldn't start again. Long story short, it turned out to be an intermittent fault in the ground circuit. There was some varnish on the negative post on the battery. All this was basically, high stress. I'm sailing alone. It's a coastline of icebergs, fog, winds and rocks. So when I finally got down to southern Labrador that fall, decided, okay, this is way too stressful. I'm either going to give up or I'm going to learn. So I decided to learn. When I researched, what a 4 or a week-long diesel course would cost and where it was available, it wasn't available in Canada, only available in the States. And by the time I'd worked out the cost of the course, the flights and the accommodation, I just casually said to a friend, I could go to college for that. And I thought, yeah, why don't I go to college? So I researched that and ended up doing a marine mechanic course at Georgian College in Ontario, actually not far from where I had bought my boat. So I did the course. At the end of the course, you had to do a 60-hour work placement. And I was taken on by a delightful man called Craig Morley, who unfortunately died of a massive heart attack last summer, actually while out doing a sea trial. He was great. He was a real character, very knowledgeable and very keen to share his knowledge. When he took me on, he kept saying, of course, you realise you're just free labour. There's no payment involved and I'm not giving you an apprenticeship. You're just 60 hours of free labour. Anyway, after the first day, once he'd inspected my work, he offered me a job and said we'd expand the business. But I really wanted to go back to Labrador and continue my voyage. So we agreed that I would work in the spring and the fall for a couple of months each time, helping him get boats ready to go in the water and getting boats ready to come out of the water to winterize them. He was a wonderful, wonderful teacher. Everything that he was doing, he would explain to me, and everything that I was doing, I had to explain the whys and wherefores, and he would inspect it and make any corrections necessary. After I'd published the first book, Marine Diesel Basics 1, the book on maintenance, this book here, he ended up using the book as his textbook, which was, I say, very gratifying. He was a great supporter and a great teacher. So then I decided to set off across the North Atlantic from Newfoundland to Azores, but on day 3 or 4 the whole trip fell apart for various reasons, story of perhaps another video, and I turned back and I decided that I would sell the boat and I would focus on creating what has become the Marine Diesel Basics project. And I ended up selling my boat, Kuan Yin, the Tahitiana, in Newfoundland, and then focusing on the Marine Diesel Basics project. However, after about 6 months, I missed sailing and being on a boat so much that I bought this boat. And this boat, Oceans 5, which I bought with 26 holes in the steel hull, got repaired and did all sorts of other work, brought me safely across the Indian Ocean on what was my first ocean passage and my first solo ocean passage to Africa, to the delightful small town of Tanga in Tanzania, in East Africa. So that's a little bit of how my mechanical education began. Thanks for watching, and I wish you fair winds and a reliable diesel.